Simo
Häyhä.
Häyhä has 500 plus kills.
That's the one. Yep.
When the Winter War broke out in 1939, Finland seemed doomed from the start. Soviet armies stormed across the border in waves, drowning them in tanks and guns, while the forests themselves became a frozen grave. Then, a single sniper changed everything. Simo Häyhä, later called the White Death, tallied more than 500 confirmed kills in under 100 days. His rifle turned daylight into terror, and entire Soviet units learned to crawl rather than run. This is the sniper who stopped an army. The hunter who would save Finland. The war that carved Simo Häyhä's name into history didn't start quietly. It came fast and hit hard. On November 30th, 1939, the Soviet Union crossed into Finland and rained bombs on the capital, Helsinki. The Winter War had begun. It lasted just over 3 months, ending on March 13th, 1940. But those 3.5 months were among the most brutal in modern history. On paper, the match looked hopeless. The Soviet Red Army rolled forward with thousands of tanks and nearly 4,000 aircraft. Finland, by comparison, had barely more than a few dozen tanks and a little over 100 airplanes. One side seemed like a steel giant, the other a small, frost-bitten farmer armed with little more than grit. Yet that giant stumbled in the snow, and Finland stood its ground. The fiercest clashes came in Karelia, around Lake Ladoga, in a place few outside Finland had ever heard of. Kola. Kola was not a river in the grand sense. It was little more than a creek, running through forests and frozen ground. But that strip of land became one of the hardest-fought sectors of the entire war. The reason was simple. If the Soviets broke through Kola on the north side of Lake Ladoga, they could sweep behind Finland's main defenses on the isthmus and roll up the line from the side. The Finns knew it, and the Soviets knew it. The cold there was not just weather. It was an enemy of its own. The temperature plunged to 45 degrees below zero. That kind of cold burns your lungs when you breathe, freezes fingers stiff on a trigger, and kills the careless faster than bullets. The ground was frozen like stone, making real trenches nearly impossible to dig. Roads were scarce, and the Finns planted themselves across them like immovable gates. The Red Army's tanks and trucks were forced to funnel down narrow paths, while Finnish troops glided through the trees on skis, wrapped in white camouflage, moving as silently as shadows. The Finnish 12th Division held here against repeated Soviet attacks. Day after day, week after week, through the dark weeks of winter, they faced fresh Soviet pushes. They gave ground, clawed it back, and somehow kept the line from breaking. It was here that Finland gained a phrase still remembered: Kola will hold. It began as a simple question from Major General Voldemar Hägglund, who commanded the corps in that sector. He asked, "Will Kola hold?" The answer came from Lieutenant Arne Juutilainen, a blunt officer who had once served in the French Foreign Legion and earned the nickname the Terror of Morocco. He shot back, "Kola will hold unless the orders are to run away." That exchange spread across Finland, carried from one frozen trench to another, until it became the country's shorthand for unshakable resolve. Amid this frozen battlefield stepped a quiet man who turned the act of holding the line into a daily craft. His name was Simo Häyhä. Simo was born on December 17, 1905, in the tiny hamlet of Kaeskinen, part of the Rautjärvi municipality in southern Finland. He was a small man by military standards, barely 5 feet 3 inches tall, but life on a farm had built him strong. His childhood was the rhythm of rural Finland, feeding animals, chopping wood, clearing fields, and hunting. Hunting was not a sport, it was survival. If you wanted meat on the table, you went into the forest and took it. If pests threatened the crops, you learned to track and eliminate them. That life sharpened his eyes and built a patience that no classroom could teach. He attended school in the nearby village of Mietila, but most of his lessons came after hours. He spent evenings repairing fences, checking the tree line for movement, and stalking game in the forest. Hours of stillness trained his nerves. Long shots across snowy fields taught him to judge distance with little more than instinct. He was, without knowing it, building the foundation for the skills that would make him famous. As a teenager, Simo joined the Civil Guard, known in Finnish as the Suojeluskunta. It was a volunteer militia that trained ordinary men in soldiering and shooting. There, he began to stand out. He was not tall, and he was not loud, but when it came to a rifle, he was unmatched. He proved it in shooting competitions across the Viapuri province. These matches weren't about showmanship. They were quiet and demanding, requiring shooters to read the wind, control their breathing, and break the trigger smoothly, the same way every time. Simo excelled. The Civil Guard also created bonds between men. It brought together farmers, shopkeepers, and woodsmen, knitting them into units that knew each other long before war came. When the time arrived, those ties proved invaluable. In the 1920s, Simo completed his compulsory military service, graduating from non-commissioned officer school. Then, in 1938, just a year before the Soviet invasion, he underwent formal sniper training at Uti. By then, he already had what training alone could not create: a hunter's patience, a sharp eye, and endless hours of practice. He could guess the distance across a clearing, pace it out, and find he was off by only a few steps. He grew so precise that he could call a range to about 150 meters, roughly 160 yards, with barely an error. That skill meant everything. A sniper who can judge distance without hesitation saves time, avoids wasted shots, and reduces the risk of being spotted. His weapon of choice was a Finnish model 28-30 rifle nicknamed Pistikorva, or Spitz, for the pointed front sight. It was a Civil Guard version of the Mosin Nagant, chambered in Finland's own 7.62 by 53 mm cartridge. This rifle wasn't glamorous. It was sturdy, reliable, and already familiar. He had owned the same model before the war. The barrels were Finnish-made, the sights were crisp, and the bolt action could handle the harshest conditions. It wasn't a magic weapon, it was simply a tool that he trusted completely. Unlike many snipers of the era, Simo did not use a scope. He preferred iron sights. Scopes in the 1930s were fragile, often fogging in freezing air. Worse, they could catch the sun and flash like a signal mirror, giving away a position. Iron sights let him stay lower, hiding more of his head behind cover, and they never betrayed him. In the dense forests, with limited daylight and bitter cold, iron sights were simply better. Simo set his rifle so that it was zeroed at about 150 meters. In plain words, this meant that if he aimed at a target roughly 160 yards away, the bullet would land exactly where the sight was pointed. If the target was closer or farther, he needed only the smallest adjustments. In a war where seconds mattered and daylight was short, this saved precious time. He cared for his rifle with a fanatic's attention. In Arctic cold, sloppy weapons fail. Oil thickens, bolts freeze, and moisture turns into ice in tiny parts that must move. Many soldiers struggled when their rifles jammed in the cold. Simo, however, cleaned his weapon before and after every mission. He avoided heavy oils that froze, keeping his bolt lean and reliable. But what truly set him apart was his fieldcraft, the art of using the land, the weather, and silence itself as weapons. He prepared his positions at night, moving into them before dawn and often staying until after dark. He memorized every fold of the ground and every branch that might block his view. He could read the wind by watching how snowflakes swirled or how treetops bent. And he practiced one clever trick that shows his mind for detail. Before firing, he would pack down the snow in front of his muzzle and pour water on it, freezing it into a crust. When he fired, there was no telltale puff of powder smoke to reveal his spot. That tiny preparation bought him one more shot, one more chance to stay invisible. When he did move, he did so under the cover of noise. He shifted positions during artillery barrages, machine gun bursts, or even the sudden silence after an explosion. He dug shallow snow pits, roofed with branches for camouflage, instead of exposing himself against the sky. He managed his food and body heat so the cold slowed him less than it slowed the Soviets hunting him. None of this was flashy. It was quiet, careful, and methodical. And that was exactly why it worked. Simo served in the 6th Company of Infantry Regiment 34, drawn heavily from his own home district of Rautjärvi. His company commander was Lieutenant Jutalainen, the same man behind the words, "Kola will hold." All the patience, all the practice. None of it meant much until he faced the Soviet tide at Kola, where one man's aim started to shape an entire front. How one rifle stopped the Red Army. The line at Kola hardened fast and then refused to budge. Day after day, it became a funnel where every attempt to move cost blood. The battle in this frozen sector stretched from December 7, 1939, through March 13, 1940. West of the ice-choked stream, Finnish units dug in as best they could, building makeshift defenses and using the road and rail that ran toward the small hub at Loimola as the skeleton of their line. The Soviets kept piling pressure into the gap. By late winter, 2 full rifle corps, 1st and 14th, were committed here. That added up to 6 divisions battering the same few miles of snow and timber. Even in those first desperate weeks, men on the line began whispering about Simo Häyhä, the farmer-turned-marksman whose rifle seemed to punish every careless movement in the snow. Facing them across the creek, the Finnish 12th Division absorbed every blow and somehow kept the West Bank intact. The pressure at Kola was never a single grand charge. It was a constant grind, a pounding backed by armor and artillery that could only move where the handful of roads allowed. The Soviet 8th Army tried to smash through along the Kola Road and seize the bridge into Loimola, while other divisions tried to work around the flanks. January turned brutal. Encirclements flared, supply roads were cut, and units on the North Ladoga front began to buckle under the pressure. Yet the Soviet push at Kola never broke the Finnish line. Even in March, when a deep fracture opened in the defense, the orders coming down to the companies were not fall back, but counterattack and retake. They did, until the peace order arrived the very next day. That was how tight the grip on Kola remained. Inside that squeeze, Simo Häyhä's rifle began to change how the enemy moved. On December 21, 1939, he recorded the most productive day of his life. 25 confirmed kills in a single stretch of winter daylight. In Karelia, daylight in December barely lasts 8 hours. Yet in that span, he thinned out a platoon's worth of men. The record survives because officers wrote it down, and the number repeats in the accounts of Tapio Saarelainen, a sniper instructor in the Finnish army who spent years interviewing Häyhä later in life. Imagine the effect. A platoon that loses men every time it rises for a sprint learns to crawl. Mortar crews begin to drop shells on tree lines just to hush the rumor of one man. The Soviets sent counter-snipers to find him. One duel at Kola shows the pattern. A Red Army marksman had been cutting down Finns from a hidden nest. Häyhä was tasked with ending the threat. He waited until the last wash of evening light, watching for the faintest giveaway. At just the right moment, the sun caught a glint on the enemy's scope. Simo fired once from his low hide. The answer was immediate. Mortars pounded the forest where the shot had come from, but Simo was already gone. This wasn't campfire lore. Saarelainen's detailed accounts mention repeated mortar and artillery storms called down in retaliation for Häyhä's ambushes, including one shell burst so close it tore the back of his greatcoat without touching his body. That is why shiny glass, scopes reflecting winter sun, was as much a liability as an advantage. The pattern became routine. Each time his rifle cracked, Soviet mortars raked the suspected patch of trees. Artillery blanketed empty snow pits. Gun crews spat fire at shadows. Every shell wasted on a rumor was a shell not falling on a Finnish roadblock, bridge, or exposed company. The effect doesn't show on a map, but men at the line felt the relief. Where one rifle pulled enemy fire onto a stump, the actual strong points held that much longer. By February, Soviet command escalated the fight the only way they knew. More men, more guns, more attempts to pry the Finns loose by going around them. 2 rifle corps pressed the front, and the Finns rotated units to keep the line alive. On February 18, 1940, the regiment defending Kola, JR 34, was pulled for a short rest and replaced by JR 69. The pause was brief. When Soviet forces pushed from the south through the wilderness around Ulismainen, also written as Ulisma, JR 34 was thrown back in. Simo was recognized before the war was even over. On February 17, 1940, just one day before Infantry Regiment 34 rotated out, Simo Häyhä stood in the snow at Kola and received a rifle that marked him out before the whole division. It was a Sako M 2830 Pistikorva, fitted with a gleaming nameplate. The gift came from Eugen Johansson, a Swedish businessman who had reached across the border to support Finland's fight. In the photograph, Häyhä is wrapped in winter whites, snow pulled up around his boots, the polished weapon resting in his small hands. Colonel Antero Svensson, the divisional commander, marked the occasion by giving the official tally tied to Häyhä. 219 confirmed kills recorded by the division at that point in the war. At that moment, the quiet farmer from Rautjärvi was no longer just another man in the line. He was the division's sharpest blade, a living answer to the question of whether Kola could hold. The award changed nothing about Häyhä's routine. The very same narrow hours of daylight still dictated his work. The effect on the enemy was constant. Officers learned to move differently, knowing a single glance above cover could be fatal. Work parties delayed until night or waited for smoke screens. Platoons broke into smaller groups, crawling across the snow instead of marching. Mortar crews tried to blanket tree lines before sending men forward. His rifle turned daylight itself into attacks. Move without paying it, and men died. This was not only about fear. It was about how commanders allocated their resources. For the Soviets, every step north of Lake Ladoga ran into choke points. Thin roads, frozen woods, and a sniper who refused to appear in predictable places. For the Finns, the challenge was how to use men like Häyhä wisely, sending them where their precision could tilt the fight. Unit records and museum accounts show that top marksmen were not wasted on chores. They were pushed to the front when a road bend, a ridge, or a culvert became decisive for the day. That leadership, unglamorous as it sounds, explains why a single rifle mattered well beyond the first weeks. The hunt for Simo became an obsession, and in the end, the storm finally reached him. The day the Soviets finally hit him. By February of 1940, the Soviet reaction to one rifleman had become relentless. Mortar crews were ordered to pound tree lines at the first crack of a shot. Artillery batteries hurled high explosives into suspected hideouts. Counter-snipers scoured every ridge and skyline, waiting for a glimpse of white cloth or the faint smoke of a rifle barrel. What had started weeks earlier as scattered attempts to pin him down had turned into a non-stop barrage. Every time his rifle spoke, the Red Army seemed determined to answer with 10 times the noise, as if they could bury one man beneath sheer weight of fire. Then came the day the storm finally landed. On March 6, 1940, south of the Kola front, near the ridges and frozen ponds around a place called Ulisma, the hunt caught up with him. Simo Häyhä was struck in the face by an explosive bullet with a small charge that burst on impact. It tore apart the lower left of his jaw and smashed the bone into fragments. The men around him thought he was gone. They dragged him out of the snow and set him with the others who hadn't survived. And then someone noticed a twitch in his boot. He was not finished. He was pulled back from the pile, carried away on a stretcher, and rushed out of the forest he had haunted for months. He would never return to that line again. For a week, he lay unconscious, his jaw destroyed, his face unrecognizable. On March 13th, he finally opened his eyes, and by that date, the war itself had ended. Finland had signed the peace that morning, and the guns along the North Ladoga front had fallen silent. The rebuilding of his face took years. Surgeons kept cutting, repairing, and cutting again. Dozens of operations meant to rebuild his jaw and give him back the simple ability to breathe, eat, and speak. The pain never really left. In interviews late in life, the man who had once spent entire days frozen in silence beneath snow admitted that those months gave him scars that never healed, aches that never stopped, and nights that stretched too long. Still, he carried no self-pity. He summed it up in words as blunt as his aim. War is not pleasant, but somebody has to defend the land. If we are not willing to do it ourselves, who will? After the peace, Simo's recognition became official. On August 28, 1940, Finland's commander, Field Marshal Carl Gustaf Emil Mannerheim, signed the order that promoted him directly from corporal to second lieutenant. That kind of promotion was extraordinary, a straight jump from the trenches into the officer ranks, granted only to soldiers who had done something unforgettable. It was the Army's way of putting in ink what everyone at Kola already knew. One man with a rifle had made a difference too large to ignore. And that brings us to the debate that still follows his name: the numbers. The figure most people know is at least 505 confirmed kills across the Winter War. That total comes from Tapio Saarelainen, a Finnish sniper instructor who interviewed him many times in the late 1990s and early 2000s, and published a detailed biography. It is the number repeated in most history books, and the one that cements his place as the deadliest sniper in recorded history. The sheer scale of it is striking when you remember the context. Deep winter, days with only a sliver of light, and temperatures that froze breath inside a scarf. But that is not the only number that exists. Osprey Publishing once printed a higher figure, 542, and that version has circulated in popular writing for years. The gap is not a math error. It reflects the messy way wartime tallies were built. Some totals included close quarters, kills with a submachine gun when he was leading small groups. Others stuck only to rifle work. Some counted any kill attributed to his sector. Others insisted on strict confirmation that the shot was his. How the Finns counted matters too. The method was unusually strict. The tally was built from his own reports, confirmed by comrades, and credited only when a dead body could be tied clearly to him. If two or more shooters fired at the same target, no one claimed it unless proof was solid. Submachine gun kills were not folded into the rifle total. That rigor explains why the figure at least 505 holds up. It is cautious by design, not inflated. Then came a discovery decades later that reinforced, rather than reinvented, the legend. In 2017, researchers uncovered a private war memoir Simo had written in 1940, only months after he was wounded. In it, he referred to his tally as a sin list and placed the number around 500. The tone was plain, almost guilty, not boastful. It was a first-hand voice that matched the cold math already on the record. The memoir did not create the reputation. It confirmed it with words straight from the man himself. So what does the phrase "deadliest sniper" actually mean in this case? It means the highest number of confirmed sniper kills credited to a single marksman in a major war. When you use that definition and line up the top names, his position holds. Lyudmila Pavlichenko, the famed Soviet woman sniper of World War II, is credited with 309 kills. Vasily Zaitsev, the legend of Stalingrad, has about 225. Both are staggering numbers. Both are rightly remembered, but neither approaches the 500-plus credited to the man from Rautjärvi. That is why, even in careful military history, he still carries the title. Simo Häyhä left Kola broken but alive, and what followed was a lifetime of scars, silence, and a legend that kept growing. The deadliest sniper's lasting legacy. When he finally left the hospitals behind, he had to start life over. The farm his family once worked was gone. Finland had lost that ground in the peace deal. He built a new life in Ruokolahti, a small place close to the new border. There, he settled into routines as plain as the countryside. He ran his farm. He moved through the forests with a dog at his side, some say a dog named Killa, and returned to the hunting that had always been his way to breathe. Later, when age pressed harder and the work of farming grew heavy, he rented the land out and shifted into an apartment in town. He never married. He kept to quiet ways. People remembered him as polite, someone who waved from the road. He was not a hermit. He stayed linked to the men who had frozen beside him at Kola. In May of 1940, those veterans formed the Kola Fighters Brotherhood, and he served for years as a board member. He also joined the occasional big game hunt with President Urho Kekkonen, trips where politics and moose mixed in the forest. On those hunts, he behaved no differently than he did at home. Quiet, watchful, letting others talk. When asked how he became as skilled as he was, he never claimed talent or destiny. His answer was always the same: practice. And then he would move the conversation along. His wounds never faded into the background. His face carried damage that drew stares, and stares carried questions. Questions could pull at places that never healed. He avoided crowds because crowds meant more stories he did not want to retell. And every careless remark was a reminder of nights he preferred to leave buried. His speech never fully returned, and the scars brought constant discomfort. He preferred the company of animals to loose chatter. In 2001, when the time came to leave his home for good, he moved into a veterans' nursing home in Hamina. The next spring, on April 1st, 2002, he died at the age of 96 and was buried in the Ruokolahti churchyard. The name the world remembers, White Death, still clings to him. though its roots are tangled. Museums and articles often say the Russians gave it to him, and you will see that repeated even by major institutions. But some Finnish scholars argue the name was sharpened by Finland's own wartime propaganda. Prisoner interviews suggest the words "White Death" were also used to describe the killing cold that haunted soldiers in the forests. Later writers, searching for a hook, fused the phrase with a single sniper. The truth likely sits in between, an echo of winter terror that Finland's storytellers polished into a single face. Today, the places that keep his story are as quiet as he was. In the village of Maittila, inside an old infirmary building of a reserve barracks, sits the Kola and Simo Häyhä Museum. Step inside, and the war becomes solid again. Weapons stand in glass cases. A 76mm field gun sits parked outside. Shell fragments litter the displays. A torn flag from a battalion that fought beside him hangs on the wall. Photographs and letters replace slogans with faces. Upstairs, the rooms guide visitors through the battles near the Kola River and the men of Rautjärvi who held that line. One room belongs to him. Boots, photographs, and gear that shrink the legend back to a human size. The artifacts themselves tell stories. He donated the Sako M2830 honorary rifle with his name engraved to the Karelia Jaeger Battalion's Heritage Room. When that unit was disbanded in 2013, the rifle moved into the Finnish Military Museum's collection. His true legacy among soldiers is not in marble, but in methods. All his techniques still echo in modern sniper training. Tapio Saarelainen, the officer who wrote his biography, spent 20 years teaching Finnish snipers and helped write their training manual. He used the quiet farmer from Ruokolahti as the living example of cold weather weapon care, concealment without gadgets, and mastery of terrain. His final interviews add a human note to all the fieldcraft. Saarelainen met him often between 1997 and 2002. What came through was not bragging, but humility. Asked about fear, he said he treated his job like hunting. Asked about remorse, he told a Helsinki paper, "I did what I was told, as well as I could. There would be no Finland unless everyone had done the same." Thanks for watching. Now check out the videos popping up on screen for more unbelievable stories.